That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
Being your authentic self, I think, also means that if you find yourself in a position where I always like to say, if you ain't making money or you're not learning something new, then it's time to move on. And people should not be afraid to recreate themselves.
Welcome to BS Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Courtney Moore Jones, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hey, Courtney.
Hi, Merle. How you doing? Excited to be here with you today.
Yay. How are you?
I am good. I didn't know you had a podcast until you reached out, so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely, and we are in year 5. This podcast started during the start of the pandemic, where we all kind of had time on our hands, and this is our 5th year, and we've actually won an award during that time, and so we are very happy to have you. I like to start out by having or letting the audience know a little bit about you. I don't go into all your accolades or anything like that, but just to kind of set the table for who you are. Courtney is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Los Angeles Dodgers. She has also she's worked in professional sports not only for the Major League Baseball, but also the National Football League Player Association. She has worked at big law firms that we've all heard of, like Munger, Tolles, and Sidley and Jenner, as well as in the aerospace industry and at major firms like Morgan Stanley. Courtney's, I believe, from Chicago, has her undergraduate degree from Mount Holyoke College, received her JD from the University of Miami School of Law, and has a master's degree from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Courtney, what did I forget?
Wow, you ran the whole gamut there. So you did a great job of sharing a lot about my background. I guess I can fill in the blanks of why I made the move from each place to each place, if that would be helpful.
Well, let's get to that a little bit later, because what I prefer is for you to start out by kind of telling us your story, in terms of, I mentioned that you're from Chicago, but, where you grew up, like what, kind of where your interests lie, what interests you had when you were growing up, who helped you, who encouraged you, who supported you, anything that you want to tell us about your family, because usually, that's relevant. Just give us an idea, because when we tell our story, I think it helps people understand that we're all a lot more alike than we are different.
Absolutely. Well, let me give you a little bit about my background. As you mentioned, I grew up in Chicago, and, born and bred in Chicago, grew up in the neighborhood of Hyde Park, which is, if you know anything about Chicago, it's the center of the universe for the University of Chicago. It's also the neighborhood of Obama, where I grew up 2 blocks away from Obama, a block away from Muhammad Ali when he had his home in Hyde Park. And I consider Hyde Park probably the most diverse neighborhood in Chicago. Chicago is known as being very, very segregated, and Hyde Park really gave me the opportunity to really be in a neighborhood where there were many different individuals from different socioeconomic races, religions, etc. So I would say that it was a very nurturing as well as intellectual environment that I grew up in. I went to the lab school. My father was a physician with the University of Chicago. My mother was an attorney as well, and she was very, very heavily embedded in the political scene of Chicago. So was definitely able to have a lens into the city that works, which is a nickname for Chicago. My mother was really part of the Harold Washington administration and was very instrumental in other political circles as well. And I decided that after going to the University of Chicago Laboratory School for high school, that I would actually move on to my mom's alma mater, which was Mount Holyoke. And at the time, I really did not think about it being an all women's school. And actually, when I arrived on campus, it was quite alarming to me to be on a campus with all women. But I was able to navigate that because I had so many friends who I went to high school with who either went to the lab school, Kenwood, St. Ignatius, Whitney Young, who were actually on the East Coast as well, and was able to really make the East Coast work for me from that standpoint. I did a lot of road tripping, saw a lot of different schools on the East Coast. And actually being in the environment of Mount Holyoke and just being in a centric school for women was really the best choice for me. And upon graduating from Mount Holyoke, I did, which was really a traditional path, and worked for the old gray lady on Madison Street, which is what we call Northern Trust, which, if anyone knows, Northern Trust has an excellent reputation, is well known for being that full service, but really got their bread and butter in handling large estates and really making a reputation. But after working there for 2 years, I realized that, finance and being in this line of work was not what I was suited for, and was, not really the path that I wanted to continue to pursue. But I always was involved in sports, whether I was playing sports or was in a city, obviously, that had rich sports history and traditions, and came from a family where everyone was engaged in some sort of form or fashion in sports. And was working at Northern Trust, as I mentioned, and read an article in the New York Times Magazine. And it talked all about the business side of the marketing of Michael Jordan. And of course, I knew nothing about there being a business side behind sports. I just thought that, players making their way on the field or making their way in the court, it just happened organically, right? There was nobody behind the scenes who was actually making all of these things work. And decided that I was going to move on and go to the University of Massachusetts. I was very familiar, obviously, already with the Pioneer Valley, and go to the University of Massachusetts. Now, the reason for selecting the University of Massachusetts, because at the time, there were probably only 2 or 3 master's programs in sports management. Now there's like over 1,000. And those 2 programs were the University of Massachusetts and Ohio University. And I was fortunate to get into the University of Massachusetts and start my path into sports. So I'll stop there and see if you have any follow-up questions.
No, and that makes sense, because I couldn't tell from the bio that I saw whether you got your law degree first or your sports management master's first. So now it makes more sense to me. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I was at the University of Massachusetts, and during that time, I also worked for the National Players Association in Washington, D.C., and was working there. And my father became very sick. And so I moved back to Chicago. And while I was there, I was able to get a great job with the Chicago White Sox. And which was, of course, you grow up in Chicago, you're the Cubs fan or you're a Sox fan. Fortunately, I grew up as a Sox fan. It was the stadium was literally, I don't know, 2 miles from my house. It was ultra convenient, and I was super excited about working for my hometown team. And I worked as a broadcast coordinator with the Sox, and that meant that I worked with all of the major networks and radio affiliates as well as the broadcasters to put on the White Sox games. And it was a job that I didn't know such jobs existed, from the standpoint of being with a team where there was so much community and being with a team that was so much fun. And I never knew that you could actually make money and have fun at the same time. And
right.
Yes, and it was, it was fabulous at the time. The teams were much leaner than they are today. So White Sox probably had overall about 140 people. In comparison, the Dodgers have over 500. So back then you knew everyone who worked on the team, whether they worked in the locker rooms or the ticketing, but you knew every single person who worked for the team. And it was a really fabulous experience. So fabulous that I said I could be doing this job for the rest of my life and not have, much career movement, which is when I decided I would move on to get a degree in law.
Now,
And
why law, though? Because law is kind of where fun goes to die, right?
Well, you know what? It's funny because I didn't know that that's where fun goes to die at the time, and come from a family of lawyers. My grandfather was an attorney. I mentioned my mother was an attorney.
Wow.
And yes, and so I thought law would be a great pathway. I would be able to continue and enhance my career in sports. And at this time, I decided I was going to choose and go to a law school that had a huge sports program that was operated like a professional sports team. And there was no greater law school at the time than the University of Miami that fit or that checked all the boxes. Because at the time that I went to the University of Miami, they were number one in baseball. They were number one in football. It was the years of The Rock and Ray Lewis and Warren Sapp. So it was Hollywood in Miami in terms of going to a school that had a professional sports team. And I definitely had exposure to all of that. But just as you said, I had no idea that, it wasn't a school or law school, period. It wasn't someplace where you went and had a lot of other activities going on. So a lot of the things that I thought I would be doing, like a kind of a repeat of undergrad, obviously was not happening at the law school level. But I had a great experience at the University of Miami. And during that time, I also worked at Turner Sports during the summer, which was a great lens into an organization that owned multiple sports entities, and it was also very heavily involved in international sports scenes as well.
So when you went to work for law firms, it doesn't appear that you actually practiced. Did you go to any of these firms because you wanted to practice sports law, or did you just make a decision, I'm going to go to a firm, but I'm not going to practice?
So I did practice for a very short period of time and I won't name the law firm, but it was in corporate bankruptcy. And during that time which you'll probably be very familiar with, was when Rod Palmore, who was a serial leader at the time, decided he was going to have a call to action and had over 100 signatories of various corporations that essentially had to dictate to law firms that said, if you don't change the way that you hire women, attorneys of color, and sexual orientation and give them opportunities to succeed and to accelerate, then we're just going to take our business elsewhere to the firms that are actually doing that. And that call to action sent a firestorm through the legal community, where they had to come up with strategies in terms of how they were going to move the needle that had not been moved for decades, in terms of how they were going to really change the complexion, the representation, the opportunities of attorneys who were working at big law. And that gave me my first opportunity at Jenner and Block in Chicago to transition from operating or practicing as an attorney to being fully dedicated to overseeing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and loved working for Jenner and Block. A firm that, had an excellent reputation for a variety of reasons in Chicago and outside of Chicago, and, had family member or had close family friends who had worked at Jenner and Block. And so it was really a great place for me to launch my career, particularly in legal diversity. And, would have loved to have stayed at Jenner and Block, but a funny thing happened, which was I got married and moved to Los Angeles. And
that's where we met.
That's when we met. Yes. And moved from Chicago to Los Angeles and started working for Sidley Austin.
So that's really interesting, because that call to action, nobody's talking about that these days, but that call to action was what started the really quote unquote DEI train in these law firms. And now here we find ourselves so many years later with all of that being unraveled.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so you were at Sidley, and then I think you were at, I don't know if it was Sidley and then Morgan Lewis or Sidley and Munger, but it doesn't, ultimately you end up at the Dodgers. And I think we'd all love to hear about how that came about.
Oh, sure. So I was actually working at Munger Tolles, and have great affection for Munger. Was definitely had a great experience there, and the opportunity for the position at the Dodgers came up. And let me say that before I even moved out to Los Angeles, I had reached out to, I want to say, pretty much all the sports teams to see if I could create a role specifically within diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at the time, there were no teams that were interested or were ready or had thought about it. And, continue to pivot to something else. And so when the opportunity for the Dodgers came out, it was such a unique opportunity. They were the first team in Major League Baseball on the team level, to my knowledge, to have this position. And, they would be the first to say that what was really the catalyst to this was the murder of George Floyd. And you really start to look at things differently when something so impactful and something so devastating happens, that it obviously changes the landscape and makes you think differently in terms about how you are positioning your employees, your fan base, et cetera, et cetera. So the Dodgers, wanted to definitely be impactful, and they felt as though they needed somebody to oversee diversity, equity, inclusion.
Interesting. And again, I mean, it's really kind of hard to have this conversation and not think about what's going on today. But I will tell you that at least at our company, I have diversity, equity, and inclusion in my title. And, I've talked to folks at my company and said, are you guys uncomfortable with that? And, their response has been, look, we're not doing anything illegal.
Sure.
It's legal as long as you're not as long as you're adhering to the requirements of Title VII and not discriminating in any way against anybody, there's really nothing to be afraid of. And I would assume that's the Dodgers position as well, because you still have your title.
Still have my title, and quite honestly, I have thought about, by no urging of the Dodgers, if I should change the title, and not necessarily from a reaction, but maybe it's more of, is it time to, is it the most updated title for the work that I do?
Yep.
I think is a better way to look at it. And I should also say that one of the other areas that I oversee with the Dodgers is talent relations, which is recruiting. So I oversee the entire team for recruiting. And maybe there's something I need to do to update that, it overall. And, still thinking about that, but I may change it, but it would not be a reaction to the new administration and some of the, the work that they have been directing. It would be more so, is it the most, is it a title that really expresses and defines the work that we do here?
Well, what's interesting is that, if anybody has listened to my last few podcasts, probably over the last year, I've said several times that I, eh, you know, am not wedded to those words,
Sure.
as a matter of fact, I've gone on record saying, all of the labels, I'm just I've been tired of labels for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Um, and those specific words, especially the word, I had stopped using diversity, a lot, and just kind of was focusing on, equity, like
Mhm.
what's fair, what's equal, an equal playing field and that kind of thing. Because the diversity part of it, I feel like, it, it- even though the numbers are not huge, it's like we're here, we're here, we're really not going anywhere. Um, so that part of it, I was kind of like, why even use the word when what we really need to be talking about is fairness and being equitable.
Right. Right. Yep.
What is the expectation for the Dodgers for in your two roles?
So, I think that what makes it interesting is because it's a completely new role, it's a completely new organization within the Dodgers, is that, it was up to me to really carve out what the expectations for this role, and what the expectations for be working with the organization to put together initiatives and make sure that we were hitting goals and things of that nature. And I would say there's two primary facets of strategic arms. One is the diversity committee, which was created when I started. And that committee is chaired by our CEO and president. And then we also have a business resource group council, which is comprised of individuals who are leaders within the business resource groups. And we have 8 within the Dodgers. And I work on creative initiatives and programs. And really, overall, I would say it is programs, initiatives, and ways in which we can enhance the employee experience, and which we can certainly enhance the way that we position ourselves in the community, and that's primarily around business opportunities, not necessarily like, kids camps and things of that nature, because that is a different organization within the Dodgers. But really how we can make sure that how we are not only engaging with external businesses, but also with our fans to make sure that we are making Dodger Stadium as positioning Dodger Stadium as a stadium for everyone, for every Angelino. And that really is the goal. And what I will say is that obviously it's not something that just falls under what I do on a day-to-day, but it is the mantra for the organization to drive those types of things.
Right. And so, and that makes so much sense when you have a business that is so beloved by so many different people in so many different walks of life. That is really what kind of defines, your position, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's right. That's right.
So
And
I'm assuming, go ahead, go ahead.
no, and I was going to say that when I came on board, one of the I'm a huge advocate of pipeline programs. Every place that I have been, I've either created or enhanced a pipeline program. And I saw that as a huge opportunity here for the Dodgers. And, to their credit, they gave me full license to create a pipeline program. And we have created 2 tracks. One is a fellows track, which is essentially for recent grads or grad students. It's a 5-month program. And then we have our traditional internship program, which is for rising sophomore, juniors, and seniors. And these programs I think, have been, life-changing for students who have been able to participate, because it has not only provided them a incredible experience within sports, but it's really been their entree to other sports opportunities. I like to bill it as the Procter and Gamble of sports, in terms of you're going to have the best internship fellowship if you come to the Dodgers, if you want to be in the sports industry. And we started off the first year where our fellows program had 1,000 applicants for 12 spots, and the internship
Wow.
program had 5,000 for 18 spots. And now the fellows program has 5,000 and the internship program has 16,000. And, it is one in which we make sure that we blanket across the United States. We give a living stipend, because we do not want the fact that you're living in an expensive city to be a barrier to your opportunity. And it has been, 70% in terms of our inclusivity of the students that we've been able to draw. And, I think of that as, one of the things that the Dodgers has really been leading with other sports teams for this program. And, that has also allowed me to oversee the other aspects of full-time recruiting as well, in which we can make sure that, we are being, very focused in terms of making sure that we have our tentacles in a lot of different ways in terms of which we recruit.
That's awesome. I mean, I mean, who knew? I mean, I obviously 5,000 people know about it, but I had never heard of it. That is so cool. And then now let me ask you this, because you did figure out how to get back to the fun, which I'm very happy for you. Um, you know, it's interesting to me how global baseball has become, and my little story about that is I went to Japan last fall, and I was floored by how many LA Dodgers hats were being sold
Yes,
in
yes.
in Tokyo. And I didn't buy one. I should have bought one there, but it was really cool. And can you talk a little bit about the global experience and the global nature of being in at the Dodgers?
Oh, sure, sure. Well, we signed at the end of 2023 the who's turned out to be the best player in baseball, Shohei Ohtani.
Hmm.
And we we knew it was going to be a game changer for us on the field. We had no idea how it was going to really propel us in the international realm. And not only that, but how it was going to help advance the international presence of Major League Baseball, period. I mean, this guy, Shohei Ohtani, is just indescribable in terms of how much he is just a global superstar. And it has changed our business from the standpoint of, how we do tours, how we present, game day experiences, what does our merchandising look like? What are our corporate partnerships, has now been, global. So it has been a tremendous, tremendous thing for the sport of baseball. And it just shows you that there are other opportunities in terms of creating more fans and nurturing more fans across the globe. So Japan, Korea is really, just the tip of the iceberg in terms of, what it's going to do is for a global sport and global opportunity for Major League Baseball.
And so have you had an opportunity to travel internationally in this job?
I have not. No, I have not traveled. I did not do the last 2 trips to Korea or Japan, but particularly in terms of Japan, I just as you said, I mean, the whole city of Tokyo where the games were held was just really painted blue. It was something to behold.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I knew about him, but I hadn't really thought about it before I went over there. And when I got there, I was really taken aback. It was very, very cool. Um, so I wanted to ask you about like being a woman in, a traditional male environment and not knowing anything about, how it's staffed or anything like that. But, can you share with us like what that experience is like and you know, just give us some idea of how that has been for you?
So, what I will say is that yes, obviously it is male dominated in the front offices and in the baseball ops side. But I will, what I will say, and maybe my team is unique, but definitely being able to bring in my perspective and not have any fear that because I am in the minority from a gender perspective, that my thoughts, ideas, recommendations, etc., will not be considered is definitely false. And I would say that I am probably in a more unique and probably in a more advantageous team than some others. I don't think that if you talk to other women that they may have the same feedbacks or commentary. But I also will tell you that again, I worked at the White Sox, almost 3 decades ago. And there are so many more women now who are in senior level positions that you would not have been able to find in any other team back when I worked for the White Sox. So the representation for women and bringing in different skill sets has created certainly opportunities to bring in more senior level women who can advance certainly the business side and to look at different ways in which we, even on the baseball operations side, I mean there's so many ways in which we use data analytics and biometrics and things of that nature. So there's so many more roles and positions that are opened now that were not open before, where women can kick in the door and really take over.
Well, and I would say that is, this is beyond stereotypes that we're here, here for today. And I think that is probably one of the main stereotypes that exists is that sports are, predominantly followed by men. And I would imagine you guys have done your studies and have demographics of how many of the true blue, pun intended, fans are actually women. And so, yeah, can you talk to us a little bit about that? And also, what other stereotypes do you feel like exist either in sports or have you had to overcome in your journey?
Well, let me think. So I don't know the exact stats that we have in terms of women who are fans of baseball, but I will tell you that I can only imagine that they are growing. And, I can just see that just in terms of, women who are in the stands and in terms of, group sales and ways in which we market, which have, become more and more popular. We have a women's, for instance, ticket pack night. We're having it this year on April 29th. And it has grown considerably year over year each time we have it as it grows in popularity. We also have a women's conference that we host here at Dodger Stadium, which is going to be May 9th this year. We started our first year of about 300 women. Now we're expecting 500 this year.
Wow.
So just in terms of, women wanting to come out to the Dodger Stadium and hear more about sports and entertainment has grown from that standpoint as well. In terms of, stereotypes, I think that one in which I don't know if it's a stereotype, but I would say it's an opportunity where we are working to grow is to certainly have more women who are on the field. There is just really just kind of a very, very, very small population of women who are coaches at any level, whether it's the minor league or whether it's the major league, as well as women scouts, women, umpires. That is some area where you may find that there's a stereotype that women cannot do these roles, but that is so, not true. As we
Right.
start to see more women who are occupying those roles, and I'm hoping that they will certainly grow. And there's programs that we are trying to create pipelines for opportunities within those fields.
Let's talk a little bit about you in terms of, is this something that you feel like, is there anything else you feel like on your career journey that kind of had in your bucket list that you want to do? Is this position like kind of the ultimate? I mean, what do you see on your horizon?
I am so fortunate to be in my seat. And the reason why I say that is because I can continue to expand my career journey where I am. I think that we have done a lot. And I think that, as we continue to navigate these, what I will call, these new kind of landmines that we
Hmm.
have now been introduced to, so much is going to shift and be shaped over the next few years. But even that aside, there's still so much more work, so many more initiatives, programs that have not even scratched the surface yet, which I think that we're going to be able to launch. And I'm looking forward to that. So, as of right now, I can't really see past some of the wonderful things that, we can do right now where I am.
So and that's great because it's always good to like be someplace where you feel like you're appreciated and provides you uh opportunity. In terms of the landmines that we're dealing with right now, I feel like sports has a lot to add to our history and has a lot to lose if if it's scrubbed in any way. Um, I mean, have I don't know, have you thought about like, the African American Museum or the baseball, museums or any of the Hall of Fame? I mean, does does it worry you at all, or are you like my husband, like the eternal optimist that everything is going to be okay?
You know what? It's alarming to me, I think, is probably the sentiment that comes to mind first. But I think I want to see more of how this is going to evolve before I feel as though I'm in panic or need to be action oriented. So I think that at this point in time, it's kind of a wait and see, but I guess I'm going to choose to be on your husband's side and be optimistic.
Yeah, good answer. As a he's the glass half full, and I'm the glass half empty. So I think, that's the yin and yang that we provide, and it is probably why it's worked for almost 40 years.
Fabulous.
Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. And yeah, and actually I've met your husband. I went to his retirement party. He was
Yes,
LAPD, right?
that's right. That's right. Retired detective. Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean there's been a lot, that's just got to be, I mean everything is so like charged, but I'm sure I feel like he retired at the right time.
Yeah, he does too.
So tell me, what do you do for fun, Courtney?
Oh, well, I really enjoy LA. But just an example, this weekend, my husband and I went to the Wooden Awards, which was hosted at the Los Angeles Athletic Club, and saw the awards go to the two top college basketball players on the men and the women's side. So that was exciting.
Hmm.
And Saturday we spent kind of actually touring around different neighborhoods in LA, visiting friends, from Santa Monica to Windsor Hills to um, Echo Park. So I love the neighborhoods in LA and love the fact that I would say probably 352 days out the year, you have no problem in terms of weather, just navigating
Right,
around the city. So what could be better than that?
right.
But I love to jump onto a new restaurant when they open in LA, and we love live sports, and we go to the Laugh Factory. So we just enjoy living in the big city and doing all the fun things that LA has to offer. And one of the great things about the Dodgers is that your work certainly blends into your fun, right? Because I go to a good amount of games every season, and um, had forgotten about how emotional baseball can be. So it can be, it's a very, very emotional sport. And obviously that's partly because I work for the team, but it's an exciting time to be working not only for baseball, but I think the sport has recrafted itself to make it more exciting for the diehard fan to, one who's kind of dipping their toe to see if they like this sport. So, I encourage everyone to check out a Dodgers game or any MLB game, because it's already starting off to be a very fiery season.
Yes, yes. And you were near my neighborhood when you were in Windsor Hills. I'm in View Park. Have you been to Issa Rae's new restaurant yet?
I have been to Somerville. I like the vibe a lot. It's hard to find a restaurant in LA that has live music,
Right.
and that is certainly a very cool thing, and it's a very swank. So it's great to see, um, her vision of putting Somerville, right smack in. I guess that's View Park, huh? Would you say
Yeah,
that's View Park? Okay,
View
and View
Park.
Park,
Hmm.
yeah. So I mean, I love all of that.
All right. Well, next time you're over here, give me a call. We'll meet for a
I
drink.
will. Yeah, we are overdue for sure.
Yeah. So, I hate to, the time has gone really quickly. And it's been lovely having this conversation. My last question for you is, do you have any, like, what words of encouragement or advice do you have for others about one embracing their authentic selves? Because I feel like you have definitely been able to do that with your love for sports and diversity and equity, and inclusion, and coming from a background of highly educated professional folks, in the neighborhood that you grew up, you really put that all together, wrapped it all up in a nice little bow. What advice would you give to folks who are not sure how to do that, particularly people who have gone to law school, but maybe want to explore something different? And, you know, uh, h- just kind of talk to us about kind of what your philosophy has been and what you'd like to share to other people.
Yes. So first of all, I think that if you are, a law student, you're in law school right now, that I would really say is to think big and think non-traditionally. One of the great things about a law degree is that you can shape it, mold it, and redirect it in any way you want to, because you are a professional and you have a skill set and a way of thinking that someone who did not go to law school does not possess. The
Mhm.
other is that young people, particularly young folks, right now there is so many things that you can do from a creativity standpoint where you can make money. And I encourage my sons to always have, a main hustle and a side hustle, and to make sure that you are continuing to be interested in ways that, whether they fulfill you financially, but certainly ways in which they can continue to nurture your intellect. And certainly having a law degree, I think, puts you a step ahead than most. But, being your authentic self, I think also means that if you find yourself in a position where, I always like to say, if you ain't making money or you're not learning something new, then it's time to move on. And people should not be afraid to recreate themselves. And so, I would say that those are probably the nuggets that come to mind, particularly for those who have a law degree. But there are so many ways in which you can create your positioning in life where not only can it be fulfilling from an intellectual standpoint, from a financial standpoint, but just to overall make you happy that those positions out there do exist.
That's wonderful. That's beautifully put. And, it just really, to me, exemplifies that, you also have had no fear. You haven't had any fear of pursuing opportunities that you feel like you are are made for you, or something that you really want to do. A lot of times people, are feel like, they're it's like they don't deserve what they want. And I think you're a clear example of going after what you want and getting it.
There you go. I hope so. Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, this has been lovely. I just want to thank you, Courtney, for being here to BS with me today.
Absolutely. I certainly appreciate the invitation, Merle. And, it was exciting to have the conversation. We were overdue for this conversation.
Absolutely. And thanks to everyone for listening. And until the next episode, remember that everybody is different and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.